Hey team, I want to show you some of the step-by-step details for putting together your 80's arcade game, and this may be a good starting point as well when you start putting together your own version of the game a little bit later on. I'm going to be building a version of Bubble Bobble. All of the sprites that I'm using are copyright Taito, and I'm just using them to kind of demonstrate the concepts behind them. So let's take a look at those and then we'll see how to add them into the game. This is my directory of sprites that I've downloaded. I've created each of these from using preview to kind of crop to get exactly the parts that I want. So here's my background, and then those are my walking sprites to the left, walking sprites to the right, and then I have a watermelon and then enemy. And the first step that I'd like to do is I'm going to bring the background sprite into my game. Hitting the plus button, I'm going to insert from my directory, and I'm just going to put the background in. Okay, now I don't want to actually add that here. I'm going to add this the same way that I add any sprite into the game, and that's going to be all the way up here at the top. Now, I need to first define my SK Sprite node that loads this image from the playground. And I can look and make sure that I have that name right. This has to match this exactly, including uppercase, lowercase, so make sure you check that. Inside the didMove function, I'm going to add the sprite and set its properties. So this is moving that sprite to be in the middle of the scene, which is 500 by 500. And I'm also making the size of the background to match the size of my scene, which is 500 by 500. So the position is in the middle, 250, 250. The default anchor, that is the location that determines the coordinates of the sprite, and you move it from that anchor, it's located in the middle. So I want the middle of the background sprite to be in the middle of the scene. A lot of you are finding that you add a sprite to your scene and it doesn't actually show up, and that's because you have to remember this important step, self.addChild, for the sprite you're trying to add. We run our scene, and now we have our background filling the space. Since that's working, my recommendation is at this point that you, number one, rename the page that you're working on to match what you have accomplished. So I'm going to do that here. And the next thing is we want to duplicate that page so that every subsequent change we make leaves the original page that we know is working intact. And now we're ready to add the character sprite. So if I go to my list of assets up here, I haven't added the character sprites yet, so I'm going to add those in. I'm going to start just with this one called bub.png. And again, I don't want it there. I need to add it up here first. And then down here, now that that sprite's there, we have to, again, set its properties. And let's add it to the scene. Cool. Now it's not quite the size I want it, so I'm going to adjust the size using a similar way as what I had up here. I go back and forth between using the autocomplete down here and just typing it. In general, that autocomplete is so handy because I make typos, so it's a good idea to use it every once in a while, not just to make sure you're typing things incorrectly, but it also tells you things that you might not even know are available within SpriteKit. Before I run it this time, I'm going to disable results because it just makes things a little bit quicker. That's way too big. Okay, that looks really good. I haven't given it a physics body or anything like that, and I would like the character to move with gravity, so I'm going to now, above the add child for the Bob sprite, I'm going to give it the physics property. You need to add the physics body first before you set any of its properties, or it's not going to work exactly. Just looking at the size is 30, and so I'm going to give its physics body, I'm going to assume it's kind of like a circle of radius 15, which should give it the size that I'm looking for. Okay, so those properties are looking good. Let's run the code. That looks so cool, so awesome. You can see that it's not landing on a platform, so I'm going to add some platforms. I'm going to do this in a very particular way though. I'm going to use shape nodes because I can see those platforms are just rectangles. So I'm also going to use a trick where first I'm going to put those rectangles on the screen and you'll be able to see them, but then I'm going to make them disappear once I know that they're working the way I want. Now before I do that, I'm going to again make a copy because I know the character sprite is working. I want to listen to my advice and continue following it so that I continue having working copies of my code that I can always fall back on. All right, so that's ready to go. Let's create the sprite. All right, so I've set its position to be 150, 150. I've given it a physics body and I'm adding it to the scene. And one last thing before I actually try it, I'm going to make this false because I don't want this actually to fall. I want this to stay where it is in the scene. I didn't intend to do this, but you caught me doing something that I have said not to do, and I just want to show you how dangerous it is. So you saw me copy and paste that physics body code in there. I just moved it over, but my platform still fell. I didn't get any errors, but it still didn't work, and that's because I copied that over and didn't think about it. I wasn't setting that property on platform 1, which is the sprite that I was working on. Again, the reason why copying and pasting code can be really tricky, so try not to do it. Now let's see what happens when we run this. There we go, and so you can see my character falls onto that platform. It's not quite doing what I want it to do because that platform isn't in the right location, but we have some tricks here. Some tricks that I want to show you to try to get the location of that platform just right. I'm going to go to the touches began function, and I'm going to print the location. And so that's going to show in my console. I'm going to run the code, and I'm going to click in the middle of where I want that platform to be. So that's right here. You can see that's located at 251.94. So I'm going to go back up here and change the location of that platform to be 251. Let's make it 250 and 95. I'll just round those numbers off real nicely. And now let's run. And so now that you see that that platform is located in the right location, I can actually look at some of these clicks and get the width of the platform that I want to use. So I'm going to click here, the left end, and that's 112. This end right here is 393, and so I can just do the subtraction to get the width of that platform. And I can set that up here where I made the width of the platform. Let's run that. And so now you see that platform is about the right size. There's one other thing that I'm going to do. You've seen that I haven't filled anything. I haven't filled it with any color, which is why it's transparent and the background is still showing up. The other thing that I can do is I can change what's called the stroke on that platform. And I can make the stroke color clear so that when I run the code, now it looks like Bob is bouncing right on top of that platform. So this is a way that you can be just a bit more systematic about finding the location of everything in your scene. And so I'm going to do a little more work to fill in the rest of the platforms so that my character has the ability to go to any of these platforms, and then we're going to work on some of the movement.